You are not doing grief wrong if anger is showing up in your grief, and chances are you are not overreacting about what happened or going crazy. In this podcast today, I'm going to outline what many people do not know about the relationship between anger and grief. I will teach you 3 of my favorite ways to cope with anger in the aftermath of loss. I will share with you why you do not need to fix your anger in order to heal, and talk about why exactly anger deserves a place in your grief experience. So if you are good and mad, and I believe it's possible to be both, let's get started. Hi there, grief growers. I am so honored to be here with you again today, as always. If you've been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. And if you are new to me and my work, hello. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, a 3-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy, which is an online course and community that has helped dozens of grieving people stop feeling lost, stuck, broken, and alone, and start building lives that they genuinely love from the lives that loss forced them to live. This includes, and we honor here on Grief Grower, not only death-related losses, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and any other loss that significantly changes your life. Here on the show, we also believe that grief is not something that we get over. It is something that we grow with and alongside, and that when we stop treating grief like a problem to be solved, and instead start treating grief like something that invites us to live more deeply, we create a meaningful life that is rich with the struggles that we faced, all of the memories that we carry, and the preciousness of what it means to be here right now and in this moment. Today on the show, we are talking about one of my all-time favorite topics, which might seem counterintuitive if you know me in person. I'm a very happy, people describe me as bubbly or confident or joyful person. And anger is one of my favorite emotions to feel and favorite emotions to talk about, especially when it comes to grief. Anger is such a prevalent thing that comes up after any sort of major life event. I joke about the 3 Ds, death, divorce, and diagnosis, but also any other major loss that changes your life. There are so many reasons that we feel anger, and sometimes anger also has no reason. And there are so many different ways that we are seen as people feeling anger based on what we've been through, based on the color of our skin, based on our gender, based on whether we're neurodivergent or not. There's so many different elements that come into the intersection of grief and anger. So we're going to get into those things today. And then also I'm going to share with you 3 of my all-time favorite tools for talking about anger. Suffice it to say that there is a moment in almost every grief experience when the sadness of grief becomes something sharper and more pronounced. For many grieving people, this can show up as irritation, maybe warranted or unwarranted at a friend. Maybe it's snapping at your family members or your coworkers or like another driver on the road over something that may have been small to you in life before loss. Maybe anger shows up for you as full-blown, full-throated rage at the news of a diagnosis, a divorce, a death, something that changes your life forever. Whatever shape it takes, anger is one of the most common and sadly the most misunderstood emotions of grief. If you are feeling angry right now, which I suspect you are because you found this episode and are listening to it, here's what I would like you to know. You are not doing grief wrong if anger is showing up in your grief, and chances are you are not overreacting about what happened or going crazy. In this podcast today, I'm going to outline what many people do not know about the relationship between anger and grief. I will teach you 3 of my favorite ways to cope with anger in the aftermath of loss. I will share with you why you do not need to fix your anger in order to heal, and talk about why exactly anger deserves a place in your grief experience. Like every other emotion, it is not something that I'm going to ask you to tidy up or fix or solve or put away or kind of banish to another part of your life. Anger, just like the rest of your grief emotions, definitely belongs, and we will talk about why that is. So if you are good and mad, and I believe it's possible to be both, let's get started. The first thing that I want to cover in today's episode is that your anger does not have to make sense, especially when grief is in the mix. One of the biggest misconceptions or frustrations about anger and grief is that it needs to be rational or that it needs to be logical. You have to have arrived at some logical conclusion for your anger to be valid. Many of the clients and students that I work with try to talk themselves out of or walk themselves back from being angry because their anger doesn't make sense to them. They will say things like, "We all die, so I can't be mad at death." Or something like, I know it's not her fault, so why am I still so angry at her? Or for friends or family who are just trying to help, they were just doing the best they could. They don't deserve my rage. Or my loved one didn't choose to get sick, so I shouldn't be mad at him. Or they were just trying to support me, or they were fumbling their words, or they were trying to give me a gift and it landed wrong. But why would I lash out at them? The thing about anger and grief, and you may know this already, is that it doesn't operate within the tidy bounds of logic. Anger doesn't always have a reason for being. And especially when it comes to grief, your anger does not and should not need to be justified, explained, or defended. You do not owe anyone proof of why you're angry. You do not need to somehow submit evidence to a jury or a courthouse to earn the right to feel your anger. You do not need permission to feel angry. Your anger does not need a reason. You can literally, in grief, just be angry. And what I want to also give you some examples of today is that you can be mad when you're grieving at like just about anything. You can be mad at a cause of death, like a disease, an undetected blood clot, a physical difference, a car accident, a cheating partner or their partner, a weapon, a mental illness, the rainy day that led to a devastating fall. Is it logical to be mad at those things? Who knows? You can absolutely be mad at those things though. You can also be mad at larger inanimate things like God, the universe, politicians, society, war, hunger, climate change, the healthcare system, fate, death, and even time itself for moving forward as you continue to grieve. You can absolutely be mad at all of those things. You can even be upset with the person or pet who died or a relationship that you lost, whether they are physically or mentally or emotionally absent. Whatever instance of your loss of them, whether they died or the relationship ended, they aren't where you need them to be. They aren't here to witness your pain or show their love for you or share the heavy load of grief or answer or account for their actions. It is okay to be angry that they're gone, whether or not your anger for their goneness or about their absence is rational. Yeah, that's the permission slip I want to give you right out of the gate. The other thing I want to talk about with anger is that a lot of times in grief, anger shows up as a spectrum and not a single emotion. I struggle sometimes with the English language because we often will only have single words when we mean a lot of things. People say anger and grief, and a lot of times people will assume that anger equals loud, violent, blatantly obvious. When people hear the word anger, they picture people yelling or slam doors or explosive rage or like temper tantrums. But after a loss, anger rarely comes out one way. And more often, it lives on this very, very large kind of x-axis, y-axis spectrum of volume and intensity. So on one end, you might notice things like irritation at small inconveniences or things that you have to do now that somebody has died. Snapping at people you love, a short fuse with coworkers or strangers, or this just like overall simmering sense of resentment or sarcasm or cynicism about the world. On the other end of the anger spectrum, you might experience things like intense, white-hot rage. Sometimes in books and novels, it's referred to as blinding rage, where you literally can't see, you're so mad. You might also feel the urge to scream or to break something, or you might actually scream or break something. You might feel overwhelming fury at the unfairness of it all. And you might also feel anger that feels so big that your body simply cannot contain it. My mom died when I was 21 years old, and I was so furious at the time of her death. I literally felt if I let all of my anger out that I would die, that I would literally explode. Both ends of that spectrum, kind of like the tiny simmering anger, like the underground anger, and the very overt anger, and everywhere in between that, are all valid expressions of anger and grief. You do not have to be yelling for anger to count as anger, and you are not unfeeling if your anger is quiet. So you are not too much if your anger is loud, and you are not careless if your anger is, to other people or even to yourself, too little or not enough. Before we get into the 3 tools, I want to take a very important, not a detour. This is a very important addendum to the topic of anger, and it's one that's even more significant in this, the year of our Lord 2026. And that is, anger does not look the same for everyone. It is worth naming, worth stating, that anger is not experienced or expressed the same way across every person or community. And that matters a heck of a lot, especially when it comes to anger and grief, because the way that we are socially conditioned, the places where we grow up, the communities we grow up in, the society, the media we consume, the lessons that we learn, all of this plays a massive role in how we are allowed to show anger. And it is important to notice not only how your own demographic and cultural realities impact others' impressions of your anger, how they see you, but also how your beliefs and social conditioning affect how you see the anger of the people around you. Because we are always kind of surveying and being interested in and critiquing our environments and the people around us. We're always just kind of aware of other people and noticing how other people see you and how your anger is perceived and how you perceive others' anger is really significant, especially when it comes to anger that is grief related. I'll give you a whole bunch of examples. And if you are looking for the research articles that these are based on, like the actual scientific and psychological research, you can find the blog for this podcast episode at shelbyforsythia.com/blog. And you can just search the word anger and you'll be able to find it there. Okay, here's a great example. A lot of times, women are socialized to suppress anger or reframe it as sadness or let it out passive-aggressively, sort of covertly angry, while men are frequently given more permission to express anger outright, yelling, punching things, destroying property, hurting people, for instance. These are very broad strokes I'm painting in this section of the show today, but I want to kind of get your gears thinking on how your anger might be seen differently, perhaps, than other people who are grieving in your orbit. Driving home even further in gender and then adding race on top of it, Black women, in particular, are often stereotyped through the harmful angry Black women trope, which can make it really risky for Black women to express legitimate grief-related anger without fear of being unfairly judged or criticized by people who are not Black. A very similar trope is true for Latinx people, Latina, Latino, Latinx, who are pigeonholed a lot of times, especially in media and the movies, as hot-tempered or spicy. People expect them to be angry and expect that anger to come out in a very specific or certain way. So when it doesn't, they are judged or criticized or dismissed or ostracized. Black men are perceived often as violent or threatening. This is also true for people from Southwest Asia and Northern Africa, what is also known as the Middle East, and Indigenous people's anger is often downplayed or dismissed as savage or lawless, as having no structure. And this is all within the orbit of patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, the systems under which we live. And I'm speaking largely within the United States, but also as they fan out into the world writ large, where these systems apply. One last thing on race. Asian people, specifically Asian American people, are held to this model minority standard, which stereotypes them as quiet and conflict avoidant. And while some studies I found show that several Asian communities prioritize something called emotional suppression, which is a conscious or unconscious tamping down of all emotions to kind of co-regulate a collective family or a community experience. It's like, if we're all kind of on the same emotional baseline, then everyone's largely okay. Asian people still feel the same emotions and at the same volume and intensity as other races, and this includes anger. And so I think societal expectation or media expectation will often portray Asian grief as quiet or subdued or restrained, and that's not always the case, and we should learn to be okay with as a society for Asian people and people of all races to express anger in ways that we, especially as white people, don't necessarily, heavy air quotes, expect of them. There's so many wonderful research papers that exist in science on the intersection between race and portrayals of anger and expectations of anger, especially when grief and trauma are in the mix. And so again, if you want to do some further reading, you can find more studies on anger, grief, and social demographics on shelbyforsythia.com/blog, and you can search for the word anger and find it there. Another way that anger can differ is for people who are neurodivergent. Their grief may be expressed, and especially anger may be expressed, in ways that look different from neurotypical people. Things like physical meltdowns, often called adult temper tantrums, or total and complete withdrawal from other people may be their ways of expressing anger. And those expressions are sometimes pathologized instead of understood as valid responses to a loss or trauma or crisis. People who are queer, hi, hello, LGBTQ plus grievers' anger is frequently perceived, especially by larger society and culture, as diva behavior or hostile, especially for trans people. And they are commonly accused of having political motivations underneath their anger. Like, you're just angry so you can get this bill passed. You're just angry so you can whine to a senator. You're just angry so you can cause a scene at this this council wards meeting or whatever the awful story is that people are making up about them. A lot of queer people as well face a sort of banishment because of others' perceptions of their anger, being ostracized from their families, friend groups, jobs, communities. Queer people express rage, society's like, nope, and kicks them out of places or spaces where other grieving people may find help and support. In another demographic lens, I'm shifting you again. Younger grieving people, I'm thinking teens and children, are sometimes dismissed as immature or dramatic for the exact same anger and the exact same way of expression as an adult would have. And it is so frustrating because younger grievers, they know grief. They may not developmentally understand or recognize the full extent of what is happening, but that doesn't mean that their anger is ignorance or naivete. And that is something that is often applied to younger grievers. I think the same can be said for old people as well. People don't expect older people to like have outbursts or be angry or to be violent necessarily. It's like, she's a nice old lady. Why would she be acting like that? I'm like, she's angry, she's grieving. And it's really interesting to notice, like, what expectations do you have of yourself and your anger, or do other people have of you and your anger based on these demographics? And then, of course, this goes without saying, poor people, homeless people, mentally ill folks, as well as anyone with substance use disorders face additional layers and layers of societal judgment surrounding anger, because they are often blamed as the cause of their suffering and misfortune, and therefore they are the root of their anger issues, in addition to everything else that they are facing. I know that's a lot of information to dump on you all at once, and it may or may not apply to your identity specifically, and it also is a door opener, a lens opener, a viewfinder for how anger and grief exists in the world. We say so often on Grief Grower that grief never exists in a vacuum, and noticing your unique demographic, sociological, financial, economical, political profile, noticing all these things about yourself, all the identities you hold, in addition to griever, is a fascinating way to recognize how grief is at play and how perceptions of grief are at play and what stereotypes about grief are at play in your own life and then also in the lives of other people around you. If you have ever felt like you've had to hide or minimize or explain away your anger because of how you might be perceived by other people, that makes complete and total sense to me. I also want to validate that it takes so much emotional energy to assess the room, to read the room, and package your anger differently in order to be taken seriously or access care or belong to a community or feel safe. And that is a heavy load on top of already heavy grief, to not just be grieving, but to be self-policing or self-dampening in order to not make other people scared or uncomfortable or willing to exile you when you are angry. The tools that I'm sharing in the next section of our podcast today are going to be helpful to you in understanding and processing anger, but I also want you to know that if a lot of what I'm saying is bringing up, oh my gosh, I haven't been able to express anger in my marriage because I'm the woman, or I haven't been able to express anger in my family because I'm the youngest, or because I'm Asian and I'm adopted, for instance, it might be worth considering how you might look for or get additional support personalized to the unique identities you hold, whether you are a poor person, whether you're a queer person, whether you are someone with a history of a substance use disorder, whether you're a Black person. If you simply Google Black mental health care for grief, or something like homeless mental health care for grief, you will find likely something in your area or something online that can be an additional scaffold to you in addition to the tools in this episode. Okay, here's the part where I teach you my 3 tools. These are 3 tools for coping with anger after a loss, and these are all a part of my online course and community, Life After Loss Academy, which is open year-round to all grievers. We have about 60 folks in there right now who are all learning and grieving together. And anger has its own dedicated lesson inside the release module. This is kind of like the second part of the course. It has 5 parts. This is the second part. And this is where we work on meaningfully grieving and releasing everything loss has taken from us, including our old identities, our old hopes, and our expectations for the future. And of course, anger is a big part of releasing, of letting things go, because we don't want to let things go. We're mad about having lost things. So often, loss forcibly takes things from us that we never consented to have taken, and that is cause for rage. And again, rage needs no reason. Anger needs no reason. But sometimes we have some very good reasons to be angry, and so anger definitely exists as a part of grief. So I go much deeper into these tools and guidance inside Life After Loss Academy. But for all intents and purposes in this podcast today, this is kind of your overview, the foundation of the 3 different methods that I personally use with students who are working with anger. So see if one or more of them help you notice or cope with your own anger differently. The first one is something I call the doorway method, and it is a common part of therapy and psychology practices. And it basically is asking the question, like, what is anger a doorway to? Because anger is not usually the only emotion that exists at one time in your heart. It frequently acts as a doorway or a trapdoor to something underneath it. Hidden below an initial or a surface feeling of anger, you might find underneath that trapdoor powerlessness, hopelessness, helplessness. Especially after a loss, anger can sometimes feel more bearable or more actionable, like you have a fire under your butt, than darker or joyless emotions, because anger comes with energy and momentum. You can do something, you can hit something, you can yell about something, you can type an angry 8-paragraph long manifesto about something, while grief's other emotions, things like despair, powerless, helplessness, hopelessness, can feel more like just sinking or giving in to the pain of grief. And so a lot of times anger is a lot easier or more accessible to feel. And so ask yourself, this doorway method, what might anger be protecting me from feeling? When you ask this question, it doesn't mean that your anger isn't real and that it's not a valid emotion to be feeling. It means that anger might just be one layer of a bigger emotional picture, a bigger emotional story. And naming or trying to name what is underneath it, what's at the root of the anger, can bring a surprising amount of relief and clarity. And again, we do so much more of this inside Life After Loss Academy. The second tool I have here for you, and please enjoy this thunderstorm outside while we are recording today, it's very apt for the episode about anger, is what I call, and pardon my French, the give a shit method. This is my personal favorite because it reframes anger as a piece of information rather than a problem to fix or an emotion to dismiss. Anger, and this is something I love about it, often points directly to what you value, aka what you give a shit about, which is why I call it the give a shit method. If you are furious about how your loved one was treated in the hospital before they died, your anger might be highlighting how deeply you value compassion and dignity in the people you love getting a say. If you are angry that you didn't get clear answers during a divorce or a diagnosis, that might be a sign that you value honesty and upfrontness and clarity. And so using the thing that you are angry about, I am angry about X. Ask yourself, what does this anger tell me that I care about? Something that was really remarkable to me after I grieved the breakup of an engagement very unexpectedly in 2017. The person I was going to marry told me they didn't want to be engaged anymore for a few different reasons, but one really big one that was a deal breaker for me. And it came out of the blue like lightning. That is happening right now here in Chicago. And I felt so kind of flattened and flabbergasted and shocked that I had not seen this coming. And it taught me, my rage in that experience taught me that I value being with people who can communicate what they're sorting out in their souls, what they are experiencing in their brains. I would rather know when you're like mid-processing something, before the thought is fully formed, before the idea is fully formed, and be a part of that process, as opposed to receiving essentially an eviction notice from a relationship out of the blue. It was absolutely devastating to me, and one of the highest values that I learned that I held in my anger is communication, clarity, and considerateness for the other person in a relationship. And I remember writing those values at the top of a list, and when I met my now wife, she actually had a list of her own that was very similar, and those were 3 values that we had in common. So the value of asking, what does my rage tell me that I care about? It can transform anger from something that feels chaotic and uncontrollable and sort of bigger than you into something that actually has a meaning and can serve a purpose for you in your life. You don't have to do what I did with it. You don't have to make a list. But even just asking the question, what does this anger tell me I value, is a really wonderful way to see anger as something more than a loud or an uncomfortable emotional inconvenience in the midst of your grief. Okay, last one. Number 3 is the get it out method. This is, sometimes anger just doesn't need to be analyzed. It can't be analyzed. It may not have a reason for being. It just needs somewhere to go. Because not every angry feeling requires your reflection or understanding right away. In fact, sometimes doing the first 2 things, trying to intellectualize anger in the moment, can lead to spiraling or rumination, or it's like all I'm thinking about is my anger, and that can be very intense or exhausting on top of everything else in grief that you are already carrying. So instead, the get it out method is about just getting it out of your body, physically and creatively releasing anger from your mind and your body. This could look like making a list of everything that feels unfair or unjust, or simply scribbling. If you can't write words, just scribble aggressively in a notebook. This could be going for a vigorous walk, hike, run. Anything that kind of tuckers you out physically is a great way to discharge anger. It could also look like punching a pillow or jumping angrily on the bed, like stomping your feet on the mattress. Absolutely. It could look like yelling in a forest or towards a body of water. Y'all have heard me tell stories before about going to the pier here in Chicago and screaming, or crying in your car. People talk about cars as a very safe place to grieve because they are sort of enclosed spaces, especially when they're parked and still. Maybe don't cry while driving, but park somewhere safe and still and let yourself feel it. Or safely destroying physical objects. I made a great list here of stomping on cardboard boxes for recycling, smashing bread or crackers. This is something I recently read about in Ocean Vuong's book, The Emperor of Gladness. There's an old woman in the novel who smashes bread rolls into mud when she's furious. You could scrub dirty dishes, beat rugs outside, you could pound clay or Play-Doh. Even chores, like household chores that require cleaning, when done with the right mindset, can be ways of expressing anger. The last one I have here on the list here is visiting a rage room. This is something that, all puns intended, has become all the rage in the last 5 to 10 years or so. So see if there is a rage room in your area. They will usually set up things like old TVs, computers, glass vases, things that can be easily broken and are satisfying to break apart, and you will wear essentially not a hazmat suit, but like protective gear and glasses and a helmet, and be allowed to go in there with a baseball bat or a hammer or something similar, and to literally break things apart as a way of discharging anger, rage, or angry emotions in a safe and controlled environment. The question I have for you in this section, or like your guiding question, is to ask, what would be a safe and satisfying way to release this anger right now? Like, what is possible for you right now? Comprehension about your anger can come later, if it comes at all. And sometimes the most helpful thing you can do with anger is simply to let it exist, to let it move through you, and to let it be expressed through the vessel of your body. And especially if you are not ready to ask, like, what might be underneath my anger, or what might it mean that I value? The get it out method is your best place to start. Even mindfully feeling and practicing releasing anger is a great thing to do and to cultivate, to practice doing it over and over again when you are grieving. The thing I want to leave you with today is that anger deserves a place in your grief. Anger is not a sign that you are stuck or unhealed or too much or not enough. It definitely does not mean that you're doing grief wrong. And it doesn't mean that something is broken inside of you, or that you are permanently wounded in a way that means you can never be done up again. Anger, as an emotion in and of itself, is a natural and valid response to everything loss has taken from you. Your person, your pet, your future, your relationship, your body, your sense of safety, your old identity, all of it. Learning to work with and listen to your anger instead of fighting it or trying to shove it away or fearing it can be one of the most freeing and insightful parts of grieving. So if you are feeling angry, let this be my permission slip to you. You do not have to justify, minimize it, or wait until it makes sense in order to work with it. All you have to do is to notice it and consider, ask yourself the questions, whether it holds any additional meaning for you in this moment. And even if it doesn't, or even if that is too exhausting of a question to ask right now, allowing yourself to feel it and release it can help you feel like you are still growing and still working with grief, even in the midst of this storm of anger. These 3 tools, the doorway method, the give a shit method, the get it out method, are just the start, just the beginning of what it looks like to start to examine the emotion of anger and to work with it inside the context of grief. Inside my course in Community Life After Loss Academy, we go so deep into each of these tools. There's journaling prompts, there's practices, there's so many more ideas for expressing each of them. There is an entire lesson, a whole workshop, a video on demand dedicated to anger, plus so much more support for every single emotion that grief brings to the surface for you. If you are in a place where you are ready for tools, community, and support to help you move through the emotion of anger and every other layer of grief, Life After Loss Academy is here for you. The course and community is open year-round and includes weekly coaching with me, so you can get support for your unique loss, whether you are facing a death, a divorce or a breakup, a diagnosis, or any other major life transition. regardless of if your anger looks like quietly simmering, that resentment, that cynicism, that quietly snitting at other people, or like absolutely boiling over, like you are on edge all the time, your grief is welcome here. So you can look in the show notes for this episode to learn more about Life After Loss Academy, or if you are not sure whether it's right for you, you can take my free 2-minute quiz to find out. And even if it's not right for you, I will tell you honestly, at the end of the quiz, you will get resources for coping with grief in the aftermath of any sort of devastating loss. I hope you'll check it out, and I would love to hold space to be good and mad with you. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so very much for joining me and the Chicago Thunderstorms today. If you are looking for grief support beyond the show, you can find free workshops, blog articles, and my new book, Of Course I'm Here Right Now, 3 actually helpful things to say to someone grieving, at shelbyforsythia.com/links. And if you'd like to get support regarding anger or any other emotion from me for your unique loss experience, you can join us at any time inside Life After Loss Academy. As a student, I will walk you through my 5-step grief method: ground, release, integrate, establish, and foster, for rebuilding after loss, and you can get live coaching from me every week to answer your questions. And yes, replays are always available if you can't attend live. If this podcast felt validating, comforting, educational, or otherwise helpful to you, please leave a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. Grief Grower is hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, with theme music by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, Grief Growers, I see you. I am so incredibly proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.